The wind off Lake Michigan had a particular cruelty in early December. It didn't simply blow it carved. It found every seam in your coat, every gap between your scarf and collar, and it worked its way in like a knife slipping between ribs. By 8:30 that Wednesday evening, the temperature on South Wacker Drive had dropped to -11 Celsius, and the few pedestrians still out were moving fast, heads down, wanting nothing more than a warm train car or a heated lobby. Daniel Marsh noticed the cold the way a man notices background noise. It was simply there, constant and indifferent, the same as it had been every winter of his 34 years in this city. He pulled his wool cap lower over his ears and shifted the strap of his canvas bag on his shoulder. 12 hours in the Halstead cold storage warehouse. His hands still ached from it, even through the double-layer gloves. He thought about the bowl of chicken soup waiting on the stove at home. He'd put it in the slow cooker before his shift, one of those small domestic victories that had become the architecture of his weeks. His daughter Abigail was 9 years old and had a science presentation in the morning. He'd promised to quiz her on the water cycle before bed. His neighbor, Carolyn Briggs, was watching her. Carolyn was 71, a former schoolteacher who had become, in the 2 years since Daniel's wife passed, something close to a second grandmother to Abigail. He needed to be home by 9. He was cutting through the financial district because the 29 bus ran along Michigan Avenue, and he could save 20 minutes over the red line. That was the calculation. 20 minutes. Abigail. The water cycle. Soup. He was 2 blocks from the bus stop when he saw the crowd. It wasn't a large crowd. A dozen people, maybe 15, gathered on the broad steps of a tower he recognized as Arden Financial Plaza, a glass and steel structure whose lobby was visible through the revolving doors, warm and amber lit. On the sidewalk in front of the building, separated from that warmth by nothing but plate glass and 10 feet of cold air, sat a collection of objects. 2 leather suitcases, a briefcase, a cardboard box, a silk scarf on the pavement, half buried in the snow that had fallen that afternoon and been only partially shoveled. A woman stood in the middle of it all. She was maybe 37 or 38. Dark coat cashmere, Daniel would have guessed, though he had no real basis for that judgment. Dark hair. She was standing completely still in a way that people only stand when they've gone past shock into something quieter and more terrifying. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at the revolving door as though trying to understand a problem in a language she no longer spoke. Inside the lobby, visible through the glass, a security guard stood with his arms crossed. Behind him, at a slight distance, a man in a dark suit watched from the middle distance with the careful neutrality of someone who has arranged for something unpleasant and is now waiting for it to conclude. Daniel paused. He was good at reading situations. Quickly, you had to be. Working warehouse logistics, understanding flow and obstruction, and the difference between a problem that would resolve itself and one that wouldn't. This was the second kind. One of the bystanders nearby, a young man in a delivery uniform, was watching with his phone half raised, uncertain whether to record. A woman in a fur-lined hood had already moved on. A man in a suit glanced at the scene, kept walking, the calculation of inconvenience visible on his face. The woman on the steps sat down. Not gracefully, she simply stopped standing, lowered herself onto the cold stone of the top step, and put her face in her hands. Everyone else walked past. Daniel set down his bag and crossed the sidewalk. Up close, he could see she was shaking, partly cold, partly something else. The silk scarf in the snow caught his attention, and without thinking, he picked it up and folded it. She looked up when she heard him crouch down to retrieve it. Her eyes were very dark. Whatever composure she'd once had was still visible in her face, the residue of someone accustomed to maintaining surfaces. But the surfaces had cracked. "Hey," he said. "Are you okay?" It was a stupid question. He knew it immediately. She stared at him for a moment as if trying to categorize him threat, stranger, distraction. Then she said, "I'm fine. I just need a minute." Her voice was controlled, clipped, the voice of someone whose default setting was competence. Daniel looked at the suitcases, the cardboard box, the briefcase on the sidewalk. He looked at the security guard visible through the glass. He stood up and looked at the address on the building. Arden Financial Plaza. He'd seen the name somewhere recently. Then it clicked the business section of the Tribune. A headline he'd scanned while waiting for his break to end. Asterisk Carter Dynamics Board votes to remove founder CEO in surprise coup. He looked at the woman again. "You're Sophia Carter," he said. It wasn't quite a question. She didn't confirm it immediately. The crowd had thinned. Most people had moved on. The delivery man had lowered his phone. The guard inside had stopped watching. Daniel picked up one of the suitcases. "It's -11, he said. "Nobody's fine out here. I'll call someone." But her phone was still in her hand, and she wasn't dialing. "Call them from somewhere warm." He picked up the second suitcase. "I live about 4 stops north. It's not much, but it's not this." She looked at him the way people look at strangers who offer unexpected kindness with suspicion, because kindness from strangers is something people learn not to trust. "I don't know you," she said. "Daniel Marsh." He said it simply, without performance. "I work warehousing at Halstead Cold Storage. I have a 9-year-old daughter named Abigail and a bowl of soup on the stove. That's the full picture." She stared at him. The wind cut down the canyon between the buildings. Her coat, good as it was, wasn't meant for standing still. "This is insane," she said. "Probably." He waited. Another long pause. She looked once more at the revolving door, at the guard, at the man in the suit who was no longer watching. She looked at the cardboard box on the sidewalk. A framed photograph was visible at the top of it, half wrapped in newspaper. "I need to get the box," she said, finally. "I'll get it," he said. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on South Loomis Street in Pilsen. The elevator had been out since October and hadn't been repaired yet. They carried everything up the stairs. Daniel took the 2 suitcases and Sophia carried the briefcase and the cardboard box. And neither of them spoke much, except for Daniel saying, "Second landing," then left. The apartment was small. That was the first thing. Not cramped, not filthy, but undeniably small. A living room that doubled as a dining room. A kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in without coordination. A short hallway with 2 doors, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. On the couch, folded neatly at one end, was a quilt in a pattern Sophia would later learn Abigail had helped pick out at a craft fair in Bridgeport. On the kitchen table, a half-finished drawing of the water cycle, labeled in a child's careful handwriting. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. The arrows were slightly too large for the labels, but the logic was correct. Carolyn Briggs was sitting in the armchair with a paperback when they came in. She looked at Daniel, then at Sophia, then back at Daniel, a look of practiced neutrality over what was clearly tremendous curiosity. "Carolyn," Daniel said, "this is Sophia Carter. She's going to stay with us for a little while." "Sophia, this is Carolyn. She lives next door." "Hello," Carolyn said pleasantly, as if this were perfectly ordinary. "Thank you for watching, Abigail," Daniel said. "She's already asleep. We finished the water cycle." Carolyn stood, collected her book, and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked at Sophia with an expression that was purely kind. "There's soup on the stove. He makes it well." Then, she left. Daniel put a bowl of soup on the table. He didn't ask if she was hungry, he just put it there and found a spoon. While Sophia sat, still in her coat, holding the spoon and not yet eating, he took the suitcases to his bedroom. "You take the bedroom," he said when he came back. "I'll take the couch. I can't let you. The couch is comfortable. I sleep on it sometimes anyway when I'm too tired to make it to the bed." This was not entirely true, but it was close enough. She finally took a spoonful of soup. It was chicken broth with egg noodles and carrots and a bay leaf. the kind of soup that required no culinary sophistication to make, but somehow hit exactly the right register on a night like this. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He sat down across from her, at the other end of the small table, with his own bowl. He thought about it for a moment, not because the answer was complicated, but because he wanted to give her the actual answer rather than a performed one. "Because you were sitting outside in a snowstorm with your whole life in boxes," he said, and everyone else walked by. She looked at the table. Something moved across her face, not quite grief, not quite gratitude, something in between that didn't have a single name. "I have a lawyer," she said. "I have contacts. I had options. I know. So this isn't," she stopped. "It's not pity," he said. "It's just a couch and soup. You can leave in the morning if that's what you want." She ate more soup. The apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of traffic on Loomis and the ticking of the radiator. "My accounts are frozen pending a legal review," she said after a while, as if explaining a technical problem. "Victor Lang, he's on the board. He orchestrated the vote. He moved fast. My personal accounts are separate, but they're connected to the corporate infrastructure through a business account, and the bank won't clear anything until the dispute is resolved. It could take a week, could take longer." She paused. "Every hotel within 3 miles of downtown knows my name." "Then it's good you're not downtown," Daniel said. A sound from the hallway. A small figure appeared in the kitchen doorway in dinosaur print pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, blinking at the light. "Abigail." She looked at Sophia with the frank, uncalculating assessment of children. "Who are you?" she asked. "Abigail," Daniel said quietly. "Sophia," Sophia said. "I'm a friend of your dad's." This was not exactly true either, but Abigail seemed to accept it. "Is there more?" "Yes," Daniel said, "but it's past your bedtime." Abigail considered this for a moment, then looked at Sophia again. "Your coat is wet," she observed. "You should hang it up or it gets stiff." Then she turned and went back to bed. Sophia sat for a moment, looking at the empty doorway. Then, slowly, she unzipped her coat. In the first light of Thursday morning, Sophia sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen she'd found in the cardboard box. The apartment was quiet. Daniel had left for work before 6, leaving coffee in the pot and a note on the table. Asterisk. "Help yourself. Abigail leaves for school at 7:45. Carolyn will take her if you're busy." Asterisk. She was not busy. She had nowhere to be, she wrote. Not a plan, yet a reconstruction. She wrote down everything she knew about the board vote, every person who had been in that room, every vote that had been cast. She wrote down what Victor Lang had said in the statement the company released. Asterisk. A strategic pivot is necessary for the long-term health of the organization. She wrote down what she knew about the offer that had been on the table from a private equity firm called Orion Partners, an acquisition offer that would have made the board members wealthy and eliminated the company's founding mission. She had refused to consider that offer. She had said so, publicly, at the last shareholder meeting. That had been, she now understood, the moment she lost the board. Carter Dynamics had been her creation, not inherited, not funded by family money, built over 11 years from a 2-person engineering consultancy in a Logan Square co-working space into a mid-sized tech firm with 300 employees. It was not the most glamorous company in Chicago's tech ecosystem, but it was hers, in a way that very few things in her 38 years had been entirely hers. And now it wasn't. She heard the bedroom door open and Abigail emerged, already dressed in school clothes, a blue sweater, dark jeans, sneakers with a slight sparkle in the rubber soles. She went directly to the cereal cabinet with the efficiency of someone who has a morning routine and adheres to it. "Dad said you might still be here," Abigail said, pouring cereal. He was right. Abigail sat down across from her and began eating. She looked at the legal pad. "What are you writing?" "Trying to figure out what I did wrong." Abigail considered this while chewing. "My teacher says you don't learn anything from the things you did right." Sophia looked at her. She says it all the time, Abigail added. It's kind of annoying, but I think she's right. I think she is too. Abigail poured more cereal. Are you going to stay here? For a little while. Is that okay? We don't have another bedroom. I know. Your dad said I could use the couch. Abigail thought about this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. The couch is comfortable, she said finally. I fall asleep on it a lot, watching movies. She paused. What kind of work do you do? I used to run a technology company. Like computers? Like software. Programs that help businesses manage information. Abigail nodded slowly. Dad fixes things. Like when the pipe under the sink broke, he fixed it himself because the building manager takes forever. She ate another spoonful. He's good at fixing things. Sophia looked at the legal pad, at the list of names and votes and the gap where Victor Lang had inserted himself between her and everything she'd built. I know someone else who is, she said quietly. After Abigail left with Carolyn, Sophia made more coffee and called her attorney, Marcus Webb, who had been her legal counsel for 6 years and was, she believed, genuinely on her side. He answered on the second ring. I heard, he said. I've been trying to reach you since last night. My phone died, and my circumstances were complicated. She looked around the small kitchen. Where are we? The answer took 40 minutes. The summary. The board vote was technically legal under the company bylaws, which gave the board the right to remove the CEO with a 2/3 majority. Victor Lang had secured that majority. The account's freeze was connected to a legal filing claiming Sophia had breached her fiduciary duty, a claim Marcus called thin but potentially viable enough to tie things up for several weeks. The house, which was in the company's name as part of an executive compensation arrangement that Sophia had set up when she was confident in her position, was effectively unavailable to her. She had personal savings. Not accessible immediately, but within 48 hours she'd have liquidity. Where are you staying? Marcus asked. With a friend, she said. A pause. Sophia, it's fine, Marcus. Call me when you have a court date. She hung up and looked at the legal pad. Then she turned to a fresh page and began a different kind of writing. Not reconstruction. Something forward-facing. She wrote 2 words at the top. Asterisk. What's left? Asterisk. The routine established itself in the way routines do, not through negotiation, but through proximity and repetition. Daniel left before 6 and was back by 7:30 most evenings. Carolyn collected Abigail from school on the days Daniel worked late, and Sophia began, by the second day, to pitch in. Picking Abigail up on Wednesday, when Carolyn had a doctor's appointment, helping with homework in the afternoons, learning the geography of the kitchen. She was a better cook than she'd thought. She'd been eating restaurant meals and catered events for so long that she'd forgotten she knew how to make things, her grandmother's lasagna, a lemon chicken she'd made constantly in her 20s, a chocolate cake from a recipe she'd written in a notebook that she found, miraculously, in the cardboard box. On the 4th evening, Daniel came home to find the apartment smelling of garlic and rosemary and a sheet pan of roasted chicken in the oven. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the scene Abigail at the table with her homework, Sophia at the counter doing something with lemons, with an expression Sophia couldn't entirely read. You didn't have to do this, he said. I was here and I was capable of it. She handed him a piece of lemon to taste. He tasted it. No, it's good. Abigail looked up from her math. She made me help peel garlic, she said, in the tone of someone reporting a minor injustice. Then, I didn't mind, though. In the evenings, while Abigail slept, Daniel and Sophia talked. The conversations found their own level, not the performed ease of networking dinners, not the careful courtesy of strangers sharing a small space, but something closer to the way people talk when they've stopped needing to manage impressions. He told her about his wife, Claire. They'd met at a community college night class, both taking an accounting course for completely different reasons. She'd been a nursing student figuring out healthcare administration. He'd been trying to understand his taxes. "She was better at it than me," he said. "She was better at most things." Claire had died of a brain aneurysm 18 months after Abigail was born. Quick, no warning. "There's no good version of that story," he said, without bitterness, just fact. She told him about building the company. Not the triumphant version, she told investors, but the real one, the years of not paying herself a salary, the employees she'd had to let go in a down quarter, the patents they'd almost lost to a larger competitor, the decision to turn down an acquisition offer in 2019 that would have made her wealthy but ended what she was trying to build. "Why did you say no?" he asked. In 2019, she thought about it. Because I still had things I wanted to prove. To who? She hadn't expected that question. She sat with it for a moment. "That's a good question. You don't have to answer it." "No, I want to." "I just hadn't thought about it that way." She looked at her hands, maybe to myself, maybe to people who told me early on that what I was trying to build wasn't possible. "And did you prove it?" She almost said times yes, the reflexive answer. The answer that protected the narrative. Then she said, "I built something real. Whether I proved anything to anyone, I'm not sure that's the same thing." He nodded slowly. Abigail appeared in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas again. This was, Sophia was learning, a regular occurrence. She was a light sleeper. "You're talking loud," she said. "Sorry, Bug," Daniel said. Abigail looked at Sophia. "Are you sad?" "A little," Sophia said. "Dad says sad is just your brain telling you something matters." Sophia looked at Daniel. He shrugged slightly. "She takes things and runs with them." Abigail looked satisfied with this exchange and went back to bed. By the end of the first week, Sophia's accounts were accessible. She could afford to stay anywhere she wanted. She booked a room at a hotel in River North out of a sense that she was imposing. But when she told Daniel she was planning to move out, Abigail appeared from the kitchen with an expression of such immediate and unguarded disappointment that Sophia stopped mid-sentence. "You don't have to go," Daniel said. He said it simply, looking at the table. "Not on our account." She stayed. Her attorney filed injunctive motions in the second week. The account's freeze was partially lifted. The legal challenge to the board vote began its slow movement through preliminary hearings. Victor Lang hired a media firm to manage the narrative, and for a while the press coverage was not kind to Sophia Board. Disputes had a tendency to produce stories that flattened complexity, and she had enough former competitors willing to offer convenient quotes. She didn't engage with it. She'd learned, in 11 years of running a company, that fighting a narrative directly usually amplified it. Instead, she worked. She set up a workspace on one end of the kitchen table. Daniel found her a second-hand monitor at a church sale in Bridgeport and rigged it to her laptop with a cable he'd had in a box since the Obama administration. It wasn't elegant, a borrowed kitchen chair, a folding table extension he'd made himself from a cut of plywood, but it was functional. She started calling people. Not the investors and board members who had gone quiet after the coup. The engineers, former employees, contractors, people she'd worked with in the early years who had moved on to other companies or started their own things. People who knew what she had actually built. Most of them called her back. The idea she was developing was different from Carter Dynamics, smaller in scope, sharper in purpose. A software platform for logistics optimization, aimed specifically at mid-size warehousing and distribution companies. The kind of companies that couldn't afford enterprise-tier solutions but were being crushed by inefficiencies that better software could address. She knew this market. She looked, one evening, at the man across the kitchen table. Daniel, working through his shift schedule with a pencil, doing the particular arithmetic of someone managing multiple part-time commitments. She thought about what he'd told her about the warehouse. The paper-based inventory systems, the scheduling done on a whiteboard, the time lost every shift to processes that could have been automated in 2010. "What would it save you?" she asked, "if your inventory management ran automatically?" He looked up. What do you mean? At the warehouse. The inventory tracking, the receiving logs, the schedule coordination. If that ran on a platform that integrated all of it, what would it save you? He considered it. An hour, maybe 2, per shift. Per team. We've got 4 teams. She wrote it down. Why? He asked. Because that number multiplied across 2,000 mid-size warehousing operations in the Midwest alone is why someone will fund this. He looked at his schedule sheet, then at her. You're going to build another company. I'm going to build a better one. 6 weeks in, Marcus Webb called with news that changed the shape of everything. A forensic accountant he'd hired to review the Carter Dynamics financials examining the period before the board vote as part of the fiduciary breach claim against Sophia had found something else instead, a series of transactions that didn't resolve cleanly. Payments from the company to an entity called Orion Consulting, LLC, that appeared, on the surface, to be a vendor payment for strategic advisory services. The problem was that no such services appeared in any internal records, and Orion Consulting, LLC had been registered, Marcus had discovered, by a law firm with documented connections to Victor Lang's family trust. He was paid to deliver the acquisition, Marcus said. Not from the acquiring firm, from a shell company connected to the acquirer, funneled through a vendor relationship that he approved himself as a board member. That's self-dealing, that's fraud. The evidence wasn't complete yet, but it was enough to file a counter-complaint, enough to force the bank to reconsider the account freeze, enough to generate the kind of legal pressure that made people's carefully arranged narratives begin to leak. Sophia sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the call ended. The apartment was quiet. Abigail was at school, Daniel at work. She felt something she hadn't expected. Not the sharp satisfaction of vindication that would come later, probably, and she wasn't sure how much it would mean. What she felt, sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel's borrowed monitor and the folding plywood extension and the coffee cup that had a chip in the handle and had become, in 6 weeks, simply times her cup, was grief. Grief for the 300 people who worked for Carter Dynamics and who were now, with the company headed toward an acquisition and restructuring. Facing uncertainty, grief for the decade she'd poured into something that a single act of bad faith had been enough to dismantle. Grief for the version of herself she'd been before the steps of Arden Financial Plaza, the version that had believed competence and integrity were sufficient protection. They weren't. They never had been. She was looking at this thought when the front door opened and Carolyn appeared with Abigail's school had let out early. Something about a heating issue in the gym. Abigail came in, dropped her backpack, and looked at Sophia. You look like you need a snack, Abigail said. I might, Sophia said. There's graham crackers. Abigail went to the cabinet and came back with a sleeve of them, placed it on the table, and sat down across from her without ceremony. What happened? Sophia looked at her. Good news, mostly. But sometimes good news is still hard. Abigail opened the graham crackers and broke one in half. Dad says news is just information. What you do with it is the actual thing. Sophia took half a graham cracker. They sat in silence for a moment, a 9-year-old and a former CEO eating crackers at a kitchen table in Pilsen. Abigail, Sophia said, when this is over, I want to do something for you and your dad. Something real. Abigail thought about it seriously. We don't really need things, she said. We mostly need more time. Sophia looked at her. What do you mean? Like Dad works a lot. And I know it's so we can have stuff. But what I actually want is more Friday nights. She broke another cracker. We have movie Fridays. Sometimes he's too tired and we push it to Saturday. I like the Friday ones better. She paused. I know that's not really a thing you can give someone. Maybe it is, Sophia said. Spring came to Loomis Street the way it always did in Chicago, suddenly and improbably, after everyone had stopped believing in it. Late March brought 3 consecutive warm days that were enough to melt the last of the snow from the window ledges and bring out the first crocus in the narrow garden behind the building, which belonged to the first-floor tenant but which Abigail tended anyway on a handshake arrangement. Victor Lang's legal situation had, by then, consumed most of the available attention in Chicago's business press. The self-dealing complaint had generated a regulatory inquiry from the Illinois Attorney General's office. 3 board members had quietly retained separate legal counsel, a move that signaled, Marcus told Sophia, that alliances were fragmenting. The acquisition by Orion Partners had been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Carter Dynamics, deprived of its destination and its leadership, was in a difficult position. Several senior engineers had left. 2 of the company's largest clients had contacted Sophia's attorney directly to ask about her plans. She had plans. The new company had a name now: Threshold Operations Software. She had 2 co-founders, Nathan Reyes, a former Carter Dynamics lead architect who had quit the month after the coup, and Dr. Patricia Osei, a supply chain systems researcher from the University of Illinois Chicago, who Sophia had been trying to recruit for 3 years. They had a working prototype and an early-stage pitch deck. They had 2 commitments from angel investors, not the size of funding Sophia had worked with before, but real, and from people who were investing in her specifically, not the brand. She was learning to find that distinction meaningful. On a Friday evening in late March, a movie Friday, the real kind, Sophia sat on the couch with Abigail and Daniel and watched a film about a lost dog finding its way home across a mountain range. Abigail cried at 3 separate moments, which she explained was not because I'm sad, it's because my emotions are big. Daniel made popcorn. Sophia realized, at a specific moment during the second act, when the film's tension was highest and Abigail had pulled a blanket up over both of them, that she was not performing relaxation. She was simply relaxed. After Abigail went to bed, Daniel and Sophia sat with the residual warmth of the movie and the popcorn smell and the particular peace of Friday evenings. "I have a question," she said. "Okay, when Threshold is operational, and it will be by July, I'm confident we're going to need a logistics operations manager, someone who actually understands what happens inside a warehouse, not just in theory. Who can communicate between the software side and the operations side in a way that neither group manages well on its own." She paused. "I'm not asking you to take anything on faith. I'll give you all the numbers. It'll pay more than the warehouse. The hours will be better. And before you say anything about whether you've got the background," "I was going to say yes," Daniel said. She stopped. "I've been watching you work for 3 months," he said. "I trust what you're building, and I'm good at my job. If you think those 2 things add up to something useful, then yes." She looked at him. "But I want Fridays off," he said. "Fridays off," she agreed. Threshold Operations Software launched its beta platform in June, 6 months and 12 days after the night on the steps of Arden Financial Plaza. The first paying client was a distribution company in Rockford that had been managing inventory on a combination of spreadsheets and handwritten logs for 11 years. The second was a logistics firm in Milwaukee. The third came from a referral one of Daniel's former colleagues at Halstead Cold Storage, who'd mentioned the platform to his new employer. The company operated out of a shared workspace in Wicker Park. 8 employees, not glamorous, but functional and, in the specific way of things that are built on genuine need rather than manufactured excitement, growing steadily. Marcus Webb filed the full civil complaint against Victor Lang in May. The criminal referral to the Attorney General had been made in April. Lang's legal team was large and expensive and would delay proceedings as long as possible. But the evidence was documented, the trail was clear, and Marcus was patient. The restitution of Carter Dynamics, that was a longer question, one Sophia had made her peace with not knowing the answer to. Perhaps the company could be reconstituted, perhaps not. The 300 people who had worked there were, mostly, okay. Companies in the sector had been cautious about hiring into uncertainty, which meant most of Carter Dynamics' talent had stayed in the market, available. Several of them were now at Threshold. In August, on a Saturday, Sophia met Daniel at a property address in Bridgeport that a real estate broker she knew had flagged for her. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow on a quiet block 6 minutes from Abigail's school. Red brick, a small front yard with a maple tree, a backyard big enough for the kind of gardening Abigail had mentioned once, in passing, wanting to try. Daniel looked at the house. Then, at Sophia. "I'm not giving you a house," she said. "I'm not doing that. You'd hate that." "Yes," he agreed. "But I am telling you that the employee equity package you're going to receive when Threshold closes its Series A, which will happen, Marcus puts the timeline at 9 to 14 months, will put this house in your range. And I wanted you to see it." He looked at the maple tree. At the front porch, which had 2 steps and a railing, and the particular quality of a thing that had been built to last. "You're telling me what to do with my money before I have it," he said. "I'm telling you what's possible." She paused. "Abigail told me she wants to grow tomatoes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's been wanting that since she was 6. "I know," she told me. He looked at the house for a while longer. The maple had a broad canopy and was still fully leafed in August, the leaves very green in the afternoon light. "Okay," he said. The following December, exactly 1 year and 9 days after the night on the steps of Arden Financial Plaza, it snowed in Chicago for the first time that season. Not heavily. Light snow, the kind that accumulated on window ledges and car hoods but had not yet reached the sidewalks. Still just early winter intimation, rather than winter itself. Abigail had a school concert that evening, a winter program she'd been rehearsing since October, in which she played the recorder as part of a 6-person ensemble performing arrangements of folk songs. She'd been practicing Simple Gifts for 3 weeks and could now play it without looking at her hands. After the concert, which was exactly the kind of event that elementary school concerts are, imperfect and genuine and warm, they walked home through the light snow. The 3 of them, taking the longer route because Abigail wanted to see the lights on her street. The Christmas lights were on the maple tree. Daniel had put them up the previous weekend. The house on the quiet block in Bridgeport, the red brick bungalow with the front porch and 2 steps, was lit up in the early dark. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at it. "The tomatoes all died," Abigail said. "That was frost," Daniel said. "We planted too late. We'll do it right in spring." Sophia said she'd help. "I did say that," Sophia confirmed. Abigail's expression resolved into the particular calm of someone whose world is, at this moment, exactly as it should be. She went up the porch steps and inside, leaving the door open. Daniel and Sophia stood on the sidewalk. The snow came down in soft, slow intervals, not the cruel, wind-driven snow of last December, but the contemplative kind, the kind that makes a city feel briefly quiet. "I owe you an apology," Sophia said. He looked at her. "That first night. I thought your offer was pity." She paused. "It wasn't." "No," he said. "It wasn't. What was it?" He thought about it for a moment, genuinely, not performing thoughtfulness. "I've been cold before," he said. "Not like you were that night. But I know what it's like when you're running some kind of calculation about whether things are going to be okay and the numbers don't add up." He looked at the maple tree. "I didn't want to be someone who walked by." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I've given a lot of speeches," she said, "about resilience, about building things, about what it takes to start over." She paused. "Everything I said in those speeches was true, technically. But it was true in the way that textbooks are true. Everything that's actually true, the kind you know in your body, I learned in that apartment." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. "Abigail told me once that she wants to be an engineer," Sophia said. "Last week it was a veterinarian. And the week before, an astronaut. And before that, a chef." "Good. Yeah." He looked at the open door. "We should go in. She'll have the cocoa out." They went up the porch steps and through the door. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of chocolate. Abigail had found the cocoa powder and the milk and was engaged in a careful process of heating the milk without boiling it. A distinction Sophia had explained to her in October, and which she took very seriously now. 3 mugs on the counter, already measured out. Sophia sat down at the kitchen table, not a borrowed folding extension now, but a real table, solid and wide, and watched Abigail stir the cocoa with the concentration of someone performing surgery. "Don't let it boil," Sophia said. "I know," Abigail said, with the patience of someone who has been told something many times and has already internalized it. Outside the window, the snow came down on the maple tree, on the quiet street, on the city that was going about its December business, indifferent to the specific, small warmth of this particular kitchen. Sophia looked at the table. She thought, briefly, of the legal pad she'd sat with in Pilsen that first morning. At the time, she'd written it as a question. Now, looking at the kitchen, at the 3 mugs, at the girl concentrating on the cocoa, at the man standing in the doorway with his coat still on, she understood it had always been an answer. What's left? After everything is stripped away. After the company and the title and the building and the narrative are gone. The things that don't leave. The table. The warmth. The people who stayed. "It's ready," Abigail announced, with the gravity of someone completing something important. She carried the first mug carefully to the table and set it in front of Sophia. "Thank you," Sophia said. "You always say that, because it's always true." Abigail carried the second mug to her father, and the third she kept for herself, wrapping both hands around it and sitting down and looking at both of them across the table with the expression of someone who is, at this moment, entirely satisfied with the shape of the world. The snow came down, the cocoa steamed, and in a kitchen in Bridgeport, on a December evening, 3 people sat quietly together in the specific warmth of something that had been built slowly, imperfectly, from an act of small and unremarkable kindness on a cold night